The camera started rolling on what was supposed to be a light redeeming moment. Meghan Markle walked onto the Late Show stage with a calm smile, her posture elegant, her presence steady. The studio lights were warm, the applause polite but expectant. Stephen Colbert greeted her with his usual charm, throwing in a gentle joke about British tabloids. The crowd chuckled. For a moment, everything felt easy. Meghan laughed too, perhaps a little too quickly. She had done media before, but this felt different. There was something in the air and edge just under the surface, like tension before a storm. Colbert leaned back in his chair, flashing his signature grin. "So," he began, "you left the royal family, but not quite the royal attention, right?" The laughter was thinner this time. Meghan's smile didn't fade, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I think there's a difference between surviving something and benefiting from it," she answered carefully. That was when the tone shifted. Colbert didn't let up. "But haven't you, in your own words, said the spotlight was toxic-hued? Here you are again, front and center." The audience shifted in their seats. Meghan blinked, clearly surprised. "You invited me here, Stephen," she replied. "I didn't barge into this chair." Colbert smiled again, but it was sharper now. "Just doing my job, asking questions." What followed wasn't the charming interview the producers had planned. It was something else calculated, even. Ruthless Colbert began referencing old clips from Meghan's interviews, her podcast, her Netflix series, quotes she'd made, contradictions, timelines, all delivered with quick humor but with a clear intent to corner her. Meghan held her ground for a while. She answered with grace, even when it was obvious she was rattled. She hadn't come to defend herself, she had come to speak. But this was a courtroom, not a couch. Then came the question that ended it all. "But what about the staff members?" Colbert said, his tone casual, "who said you made their lives hell? Are they lying too?" A silence fell across the room like a curtain dropping. Meghan froze. For a full second, she didn't speak. Her fingers tensed around the edge of her chair. She looked down, then up at Colbert. "That's not a question," she said softly. "That's a headline." Colbert chuckled nervously. "We just ask the questions, Meghan. That's what we do here." But no one laughed. The studio was still. The band wasn't playing. Even the audience didn't know what to do. Meghan leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly. "You're not asking questions. You're using my pain as entertainment." She stood up, unclipped her microphone, and walked off the set. No music, no applause, just stunned silence. Colbert stared ahead, blinking. Then, with a weak smile, he muttered something no one really caught and cut to commercial. The internet didn't wait. The clip went viral within minutes. Headlines everywhere screamed about the breakdown, the drama, the walkout scene around the world. Commentators took sides, fans defended her, critics attacked. But one small moment went mostly unnoticed. As Meghan stepped off stage just before the cameras cut, she was caught by a backstage mic whispering something. "They warned me this would happen. After Geneva." It was quick. Barely audible, but it was there. A few internet sleuths picked up on it. What happened in Geneva? One post asked on Reddit, "Is this about the UN conference she went to in 2022? Another thread speculated about secret meetings, surveillance, threats. But the mainstream news didn't cover it. They were too busy analyzing her body language and Colbert's punchlines. But that whisper, that cryptic phrase had been captured. And someone, somewhere, was listening. The camera footage from the Late Show taping had already crossed 20 million views by morning. Every second was dissected. Meghan's expressions, Colbert's tone, the silence of the audience. But beneath the trending hashtags and split-screen cable analysis, a smaller conversation had started online. "They warned me this would happen." After Geneva, the phrase echoed in a handful of Reddit forums and encrypted Telegram channels. A grainy clip pulled from a backstage mic had picked it up. It was only a whisper, muffled beneath the sound of stage hands moving. But it was real. And for those watching closely, it wasn't just a breakdown, it was a signal. Across the Atlantic, in a quiet part of Geneva, a former BBC investigative journalist named Lena Hartman was jolted awake by a text. "Did you hear it? Meghan? Geneva, it's starting." Lena hadn't slept well in weeks. For years, she had worked on uncovering institutional corruption in royal charities, global education funds, and human rights summits. In 2022, she'd met Meghan briefly off the record at a unaffiliated event titled Global Futures for Women and Children. It had seemed ordinary. But after that meeting, Lena's credentials were quietly revoked. Two of her sources disappeared. She never found out why. Now, hearing Meghan say Geneva on live American TV triggered a memory one she had buried. That summit had not gone as planned. Behind closed doors, there was a side meeting invite anonymously. No recordings, no press. Just 12 people. Meghan was one of them. Lena wasn't invited, but she had seen the security detail tighten, had watched someone slip Meghan a sealed folder. The label had one word: Astor. She hadn't thought about it in months, till now. Back in New York, Colbert's team scrambled. The network was in chaos. The executive producer, Mara Fields, had already taken 4 calls from the network's legal team. "We might get sued," someone said. But Mara wasn't worried about lawsuits. She was worried about what Meghan said. Or more precisely, what she meant. As she reviewed the audio files, she stopped cold when she heard the Geneva line. "Play that again," she told her assistant. They boosted the volume, slowed it down. It was clear, unmistakable. Colbert hadn't noticed it on set. Most of the crew didn't. But Mara had been around long enough to know when something wasn't part of the show. Meghan didn't slip. She signaled. And whatever Geneva meant, it wasn't about the press. Meanwhile, in London, a private intelligence firm picked up the transcript. Their job was monitoring key figures for reputation risk, political threat, or leaks. Meghan was still a tracked asset due to her ties to the royal family and her sudden pivot into human rights activism. When the phrase was flagged, the alert hit the desk of a man named Robert Voss, former MI6 asset turned private sector fixer. Voss narrowed his eyes at the transcript. He tapped a few keys, pulling up files from the Geneva summit. Then another alert popped up. Code Violet reactivated. Unconfirmed. Code Violet wasn't public. Wasn't even known to most sitting government officials. It referred to a buried joint operation between multiple Western intelligence bodies originally designed to track and suppress politically disruptive media figures before they could influence global public opinion too far. Meghan had once been flagged, then quietly dismissed. But now, with her whisper, the system stirred again. And in California, Harry watched it all unfold from their Montecito home. He wasn't in the audience that night. He had advised her not to do the interview, but she had insisted. Now, watching the clip over and over, he heard what no one else would. He remembered Geneva too, and he knew if Meghan had said those words aloud, even in passing, something serious was coming. The cameras had stopped. But the real story had just begun. The sun rose over Montecito quietly, but inside the SussexEstate.com had turned to crisis. Meghan sat at the edge of the bed, eyes locked on the television screen. Every network was playing the clip. They weren't talking about Geneva yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Harry stood nearby, phone in hand, pacing. "They heard it," he said finally. "Saad pinged it. MI6 too. Even the Swiss." Meghan didn't flinch. "Let them hear it," she whispered. Started it. Back in London, Robert Voss was already moving. Geneva wasn't just a memory, it was a sealed operation, buried in diplomatic silence. Meghan's sentence hadn't just reopened a door, threatened to blow the entire room apart. He picked up his phone. "Activate the grid." I want all participants from the 2022 Geneva Summit traced. Anyone who spoke to Markle, especially Hartman. Lena Hartman, meanwhile, was halfway through packing her things. She'd received 2 anonymous messages overnight. One warning her to stay quiet. The other offering her protection if she acted fast. The sender of the second message used the name Astor. She hadn't seen that word since the Geneva file. It wasn't a code name, it was a directive. A failed one. Astor was meant to be a coalition, a global media alliance meant to expose state-run propaganda, buried inside humanitarian efforts. It had been formed quietly, discussed in that closed room during the summit. But after one reporter died under suspicious circumstances, it was shelved, silenced, erased. Meghan had seen that file. Now she was speaking again. Lena boarded a train to Berlin to meet her old contact from Deutsche Presse. Someone 2 cars behind her took a photo and sent it to a number listed only as Room 12. In Washington, D.C., political analyst and former CIA liaison Mark Tilden stared at the message. It didn't work for the government anymore, not officially. But people still called him when things got strange. Geneva Astor, and now Meghan Markle. He thought he'd seen everything. Tilden opened a secure line and called a woman in Brussels. "You watching this?" I'm watching," the voice said, "and I'm not the only one." She's cracked it open. "Then we're going to need the tapes." There had been tapes from Geneva, secret ones, recorded during that off-the-record meeting. They were never supposed to exist, but someone had archived them, blackmail insurance, in case things ever came unraveled. That moment had arrived. On the other side of the Atlantic, Stephen Colbert sat in his office staring at his coffee. Hadn't slept. His producers were furious. The network was rattled, and some unnamed man from the State Department had called his personal number at 3 a.m. "I hope you know what she meant," the voice said. "I don't," Colbert had answered. "Honestly." "Then you're already in the way," the voice replied, and hung up. Colbert knew how his show worked. He was allowed to poke fun, expose hypocrisy, but only within safe lanes. Meghan had taken it far beyond that. Geneva was above his pay grade. But he could feel it. His questions hadn't been his own. Someone had guided him, slipped him the quotes, framed the narrative, and he'd walked right into it. Now, reporters were outside his house. But the real danger wasn't from the media. That afternoon, the video of Meghan's walkout was banned in several countries, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China among them. Global human rights groups released vague statements of concern. The UN declined to comment. But someone was listening. Someone was afraid of what might be exposed. And Meghan, she wasn't running. She stood on her balcony, phone in hand, messaging. "Lena Hartman, it's time." They buried it under Geneva. "Let's dig it back up." Far below, a black car with diplomatic plates idled on the street. Watching, waiting, rain drizzled lightly over Berlin as Lena Hartman stepped out of the Hauptbahnhof train station, her hood pulled low, her breath fogging in the cold air. She checked her phone twice before moving. The message from Meghan had been brief but loaded. "It's time." They buried it under Geneva. "Let's dig it back up." Lena wasn't sure whether to be afraid or angry. She remembered that room. In Geneva, thick with tension, diplomats pretending to sip coffee while negotiating what truths would never be spoken. Meghan had been there unofficially. Brought in not as a royal, but as a humanitarian voice, one they didn't expect to push so far. She did. And now the silence was breaking. As Lena entered a quiet cafe in Kreuzberg, a man looked up from a corner booth and nodded once. His name was Amir Sadie, a former journalist turned data broker. He didn't smile. He never did. "You said Project Astor was dead," Lena said after sitting. "It was," Amir replied, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Till your Duchess whispered it into a microphone. "What's on this?" A piece of what they never meant to record. Geneva, 2022. Room 5, Lena hesitated, then pocketed it. She didn't want to open it here. You're being followed, Amir added. 2 men, one's not local. Lena's hand stiffened around her coffee cup. Agency. Amir shrugged. Not sure. Could be GRU, could be private sector. Back. In California, Meghan sat in front of her laptop with a secure connection open. She was on a call with Mark Tilden. His face looked older than she remembered, creased by secrets and half-regrets. I made enemies by attending Geneva. She said, but I didn't make mistakes. Tilden nodded slowly. You're not wrong. Astor was real, and it scared a lot of governments. You think they're going to let you expose it now? They're already trying to stop me, Meghan replied. But they made a mistake. Tilden leaned forward. What? They underestimated how much I remember, and how much is still out there. He paused. If you go forward with this, the institutions that protect you now will vanish. The media will flip. Allies will retreat. Meghan's voice didn't shake. I don't need protection. I need truth. Meanwhile, in London, Robert Voss stood before a private panel inside an MI6 briefing room. The walls were lined with soundproofing, the air thick with suspicion. We have confirmation she's coordinating with Hartman and Tilden, he said. We also believe a leak occurred inside room 5 of the Geneva compound. One of the panelists leaned forward. What are the odds this goes public? Voss took a long breath. If they release the full transcript, the British government will face international scrutiny. Not just as Washington, Brussels, even Tel Aviv. Then what do you suggest? Voss's answer was cold. We do what's always been done. We disrupt, discredit, and destroy the story before it breathes. That same evening, Lena received an anonymous email from room 12 at protonmail.com with just one sentence. Your mother wasn't just a translator in Geneva. Ask her what really happened. Her heart skipped. Her mother had worked in Geneva during that summer as a civilian linguist. Lena had never thought to question it. Now she wasn't so sure. She called immediately. Mama, she said softly, did you ever translate for room 5? There was a pause, then a shaking voice. Lena, listen to me carefully. Don't trust what's coming next. That meeting, those people, they weren't there for peace. They were burying something. Something they made disappear. The line. When dead in New York, Colbert's team was under lockdown. His assistant, Amanda, found a handwritten note on her desk when she returned from lunch. No one saw who left it. Stay out of this. This isn't late-night comedy anymore. It's protocol. Stephen Colbert reread the note 5 times that night. He finally understood. This wasn't about Meghan. This was about Geneva. About secrets. Governments had agreed never to tell. And now someone was telling them the dam was cracking. And the flood was coming. The flash drive was encrypted military grade. Lena Hartman had spent the last 6 hours in a secure lab outside Berlin trying to break into it with Amir's help. When the code finally gave way, what they saw wasn't a file. It was a live feed room 5. Not a recording, a surveillance camera. Still active, still watching. The feed showed a white-walled room, a single conference table, 6 chairs. One man sat with his back to the camera, speaking in a voice so calm it chilled her. They're digging again. Meghan opened the gate, shut it. Or we go public with the photos. Amir's jaw clenched. That's Director Neil, NATO Intelligence. He was in Geneva. But I thought he'd retired. He didn't, Lena whispered. They just took his name off the books. She recorded the footage instantly. But seconds later, the screen turned black. Access terminated. A loud ping hit Amir's computer. Then another dozens of IP addresses. Then a warning. Stop. Lena stood up. We need to leave now. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Meghan was visited by someone she hadn't seen in over 2 years, Samantha Chen, a former British intelligence liaison turned whistleblower. You shouldn't be alone right now, Samantha said as she entered the villa. I saw the footage. Colbert, Geneva. You've triggered something that's been dormant for a decade. Then let it wake up, Meghan replied. No, Samantha said firmly. You don't understand. Astor wasn't just a program. It was a weapon. Meghan stared. A weapon. Samantha nodded. Cognitive mapping, psychological profiling, media redirection. They didn't just want to control headlines. They wanted to pre-wire public belief. Decide what people would accept as truth before it even happened. And Geneva. That was the treaty to shut it down. Quietly, in exchange for immunity. Meghan went still. And I was there. You were supposed to smile and disappear. In Washington, D.C., a White House advisor was handed a red folder marked Code Glass. He flipped it open and saw the headline. Markle leak compromises Geneva Protocol under it. A list of names. One of them was underlined. Tilden mark asset turn variable. The advisor picked up a secure line. Activate blackout protocols on all channels. Scrub room 5. And find out how the footage got into German hands. In Berlin, Lena and Amir were on the move. They took only what they could carry. The flash drive, 2 burner phones, and a satchel filled with physical documents Amir had been collecting since 2022. One page stood out. It was labeled Astor Trial Alpha Approved for implementation. In Schools USA, Lena's eyes widened. They tested this in education. That's why Meghan snapped during that interview. Amir said, it wasn't just about royals or reputation. It was about how they rewired society. With the kids. At the same time, in a luxury hotel in London, Robert Voss made his move. He called a press contact under a pseudonym. Run a story. Meghan's delusions tied to discredited conspiracy. Push mental health, paranoia. Feed the narrative. Then bury it. Within hours, major headlines began flooding Twitter, Instagram, and mainstream news. Markle and Chris's sources close say she's spiraling. Royal Insider calls Geneva rumors fantasy. Flash drive hoax. German journalists under investigation for digital espionage. Lena and Amir went dark. They left Berlin, heading south toward Zurich toward the archives of the World Diplomatic Forum, where Room 5's original treaty had been filed. Only one copy existed. In New York, Stephen Colbert received an encrypted message on a USB slip. Under his apartment door, you weren't supposed to ask real questions. Now you have a choice. Apologize. Or disappear like Room 12. He stared at it for a long time before dialing a number he hadn't used in years. CIA press desk. Line secure. This is Colbert. I need to report a threat. Back in California, Meghan stepped onto her patio. She held Samantha's burner phone. I want to go on camera, she said. Samantha hesitated. Live, Meghan confirmed. Unedited. No press handlers. Just me and the truth. Samantha nodded. Then we go global. But once we do this, there's no turning back. Meghan's voice was steady. There never was. The Zurich train arrived under gray skies and heavier thoughts. Lena Hartman and Amir stepped onto the platform knowing every camera in the station could be watching, but it was their only option. The World Diplomatic Forum's archive building sat nestled inside a high-security zone just beyond the city center. It was the final place where physical records from the Geneva Protocol were believed to exist. They found the Room 5 agreement. They could prove everything. Astor, the cover-ups, the psychological warfare. Inside the archives, security was tight but procedural. Lena used her former credentials still active through a dormant press affiliation, while Amir posed as her assistant. They moved swiftly through the marble corridors, past diplomatic portraits and metal detectors, toward Section C4, Private Treaties, Restricted Nations Index. Meanwhile, in California, Meghan sat in a low-lit studio inside a private residence. The crew was minimal, just Samantha, a trusted camerawoman, and a secure satellite uplink. No producers, no network filters. The broadcast would go directly to an encrypted stream with mirrored uploads across a dozen uncensored platforms. Meghan adjusted her earpiece, looked into the lens, and spoke. They told me silence would protect me. That disappearing would keep my family safe. But silence is how this system thrives. Within minutes, the stream went live. Tens of thousands tuned in. Then hundreds of thousands. It didn't matter how quickly media tried to discredit her, this feed couldn't be stopped. Back in Zurich, Lena finally located the Room 5 files, locked inside a temperature-controlled vault. Amir picked the access lock with calm precision. Inside, dozens of folders lined the shelf. But one drew her attention immediately. It was labeled Aster Addendum Restricted Implementation Brief 2009 to 2014. Lena pulled it down and flipped through pages of declassified memos, project testing logs, and troubling statistics. Trial regions: California, Texas, Sussex, Munich. Success metrics: 72% memory alignment after 3 months. Phase 2, media figure integration. Celebrity partnership model confirmed. She whispered, they didn't just influence students. They used celebrities to shape the baseline. Amir's face hardened. Manufactured trust. Influencers were never the victims. They were part of the architecture. Just then, a silent alarm triggered. They know we're here, Lena said. We need to get out now. They stuffed the documents into a case and exited through a fire escape. Outside, sirens echoed faintly, but they were gone before anyone arrived. Across the Atlantic, Colbert was cornered. The CIA had dismissed his report as non-actionable. His producers warned him not to speak publicly again. And then came the envelope, no name, stuck hard inside. Room 12, Paris, 2015. Do you remember what happened to the Belgian delegate? Colbert's hands trembled. He knew. Everyone in diplomatic circles did. The Belgian delegate fell from a hotel window 2 days before testifying about NATO corruption. No autopsy was ever made public. That night, Colbert stood in his kitchen and recorded a private video on his phone. If anything happens to me, this isn't paranoia. It's pattern. Room 5 exists. Aster was real. Meghan was right. He uploaded it to a dead drop site known only to 2 trusted journalists and turned off his phone. Meanwhile, in London, Robert Voss found his fortress shaking. A leak had reached MI6, an internal memo revealing Voss was not just an advisor to the palace, but a architect of a STER's UK division. His political shield was cracking. But instead of retreating, he doubled down. He went live on BBC News for an emergency clarification, branding Meghan's broadcast as an unfortunate spiral from a former duchess grasping at conspiracy to stay relevant. His smugness was met with silence. Then, during the segment's final minute, something happened. The screen glitched. A new feed cut in. Footage from the Geneva conference, never before seen. It showed Meghan in a back room, not smiling for cameras, but crying, cornered by 2 men. One of them, Mark Tilden. Voiceover followed, layered and masked. If this was a delusion, how did we get the footage? The BBC scrambled to regain control. The segment cut. The studio went dark, but the clip had already been downloaded millions of times. Lena and Amir, now in an undisclosed safe house in France, watched it unfold. We're too late to stay quiet, Amir said. Lena nodded. This isn't about journalism anymore. It's about memory versus machinery. As Meghan's broadcast continued, her voice never cracked. I don't need you to believe me. Just remember. That's how ASTER loses. And in the corner of the livestream screen, 3 words flashed briefly, barely visible to the average viewer. Project Iron Veil initiated. The rain came down in sheets across New York City as Meghan Markle stepped out of the black SUV. No makeup, no security detail, no entourage. just her and the weight of everything she had uncovered. The building before her wasn't a studio or a palace, it was the United Nations headquarters. Inside, Lena Hartman and Amir waited by the private delegate's entrance, clutching a hard drive loaded with Astor documents, video footage, and proof of Room 5. Every firewall and backup had been bypassed. This was their last card to play. The UN Security Council wasn't supposed to meet that day, but urgent whispers from 5 member states had triggered an emergency session. One by one, diplomats filed in, some curious, others nervous, a few clearly panicked. Cameras were banned, phones confiscated. What was about to be shown wasn't for public broadcast, not yet. Stephen Colbert arrived quietly and took a seat in the observation gallery. No cameras followed him this time. He looked older, slower, but still sharpened. He hadn't spoken publicly since his leaked video appeared 2 nights ago. But his presence here sent a message. This wasn't about entertainment anymore. It was about accountability. When Meghan stepped into the chamber, a wave of murmurs broke out. She held no title now, no official authority, yet everyone turned to listen. She took a breath, then she began. "My name is Meghan Markle. I was not supposed to be here, was supposed to fade away, become a memory the system could manage. But I remember, and I have proof." Lena cued the presentation. Screen lit up with decades of classified footage, early test zones in America. School systems modified through subtle psychological reinforcements. Celebrities briefed and managed by agencies through soft influence contracts. Then, most damning documents linking Astor to several UN subcommittees over the past 15 years. A wave of murmuring surged. One delegate from South Africa stood up, demanding answers. The German representative looked at Lena and asked, "How far did it go?" She replied without flinching, "Into your media, your public health messaging, even the way your children learned about war, gender, or history." Then came the final blow, footage recovered from Geneva 2015. It showed Meghan, only days into her first official appearance as a royal figure, being pulled into a room by 2 unknown officials and handed a folder marked Astor Intel, Phase 3. She was told she would be protected. That public trust would be her currency and her chain. From that moment, Meghan said, "My marriage, my interviews, even my silences, they weren't mine. They were curated, not by the palace, not just by the press, but by a network that needed me to be either adored or hated, never heard." A heavy silence fell. Then the Russian ambassador broke it with a simple, cold statement. "If what you say is true, then we were all players, not leaders." The next 30 minutes were chaos. Debates erupted. Delegates demanded time to verify the files. Others accused the speakers of falsification. But a vote was called, a motion to launch an independent international tribunal to investigate Astor, Room 5, and any nation-state connected to psychological influence programs. The vote passed. Meghan stepped back. Her hands shook, but not from fear this time. It was relief. Outside the building, journalists waited in the rain. When she finally emerged, they shouted questions, some hostile, some desperate. She stopped, looked out at them, and said, "I was never the story. But they used me to bury the real one. That ends today." Lena and Amir didn't return to France. They disappeared. Their mission was complete. The story would continue without them. Colbert left the UN in silence, walked alone through the rain, and smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. He knew what this meant. Late night wouldn't be the same again. And maybe that was a good thing. In the following weeks, fallout came fast. Governments denied everything, then quietly purged departments. Astor was never officially acknowledged, but its digital footprint was too large to bury now. Whistleblowers came forward. Media empires split. A global reckoning began. But perhaps the most striking change came from the public itself. People stopped accepting surface stories. They started asking real questions, demanding receipts. And, somewhere buried in millions of views, reposts, and translated subtitles, one line from Meghan kept echoing. You can program a nation, but you can't program memory. Not forever. In an era of misinformation, one truth had survived. And it came from the most unlikely source, a woman they once tried to silence. With a smile,